Hello there. Today we're going to be talking about a few things. One of which is going to be about how do you practice drawing. So the easiest way to practice drawing when you first start is to just find an assortment of items that you think are interesting looking. Um, for example, we can go on Pinterest and we can just look at stuff. And we can scroll until we see something that looks kind of interesting. Um, Maybe some of these stick out to you. I'm kind of interested in this one. Um, so we can see this is a $70 gemstone thing, birthstone. Okay, so we can just take that image and we can just put that in our document. We can go ahead and shrink that down to size. We add that to our little assortment of items here that we're interested in drawing. And you don't have to put it in a document if you're drawing on a piece of paper. You can just look at your computer screen, or you can go get that item in real life. Either way, find something you're interested in actually drawing is the main point here, right? So when you want to practice drawing, you want to first start with taking whatever it is you're planning on drawing. Now, maybe what you're planning on drawing is you're planning on copying like a video or an illustration someone made, and those are completely fine. But even if you're doing that, the first thing you do should always be to try to copy it as exactly as possible. So we want to see how tall this bottle is, and then we want to see how tall this neck is, and then we want to see how wide is relative neck, if that makes sense. And then we want to draw the bottle on the side, like a lump on the inside. Then we can see that we're looking down at it. We want to add a little bit of a circle at the top. And then our neck is not quite as long as we needed it to be. We can adjust for that. This. Bottom is round. And then we have a bit of a bottle going on here. A bit of a bottle. We have a little lip here for where the bottle opens up. And now we can add some of the details. Like we can add the cork in here at the top. The little rim where the bottle is. We can add the little label. I can't quite read what it says, so we're just going to skip that little part. We want to make sure this is nice and round, because the bottle is nice and round. And then we want to figure out how high the label is. Add our label. The label goes past the halfway point, so it goes all the way over here, actually. So let's add our little label. There we go. Go around the outside and erase what we aren't using anymore. And this is how you practice drawing. At least the first step. We got our label. We can see that there's a T, E, N, and O. And then there's this little trumpet thing. There we go. Bump. And there's quite a dark shadow right here. Can't see through it at all. A lot of this bulb down here you can't see either. Can't really see the bottom of the glass too well. So it looks like this. There seems to be some reflection going on. You can kind of see what's going on in the room where this photo was taken. The heat treat on the top of the bottle and the bottom of the bottle are different, so the top is a lot harder to see through. So you can just color that in. And that seems to be how the bottle appears to be. And that is the first step to practice is replication. You want to replicate the thing that you're seeing. The second step is to do analysis. So when you're going to do your analysis, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the bottle and you're going to look at your reference, or your drawing and look at your reference, and you're going to see what's different about them, right? So this bottle feels a whole lot thinner and taller than mine. And if we draw lines that go across, we can actually see if that's true. You can see that the bottom is very close and the top is also very close, but it looks like mine's actually slightly taller than the picture. So the question is then why does it look like this bottle is so much taller than mine? Well, it's because it probably is. Mine is a little bit of a big boy. So if we go ahead and grab my bottle and we drag it over, we can see how much wider it is. It is so much wider, right? Um, so if we actually shrink it down to the correct size, we can see how much shorter or how much smaller my bottle actually is. My bottle is significantly smaller than it's supposed to be. It just looks bigger because you can imagine that we're closer to it. So this is a very close-up picture of a bottle, whereas this is a much further away picture of a bottle. So what we want to do is we want to start over and try again. This time keeping in mind that we got the height relatively correct, but we didn't make it thin enough. So we have to make it a lot thinner in order to make it look like the original. We're going to go through again, and we want to keep a reference. We want to keep using the reference still. Make these corners rounded. We want to make the top rounded. We want to add this label section. Put the label a little bit higher. And then there's this bulge part. Then there's a cork up here. And then we have down here, we have a label. The label is much longer now because our bottle is much thinner. We have the little nubule at the bottom. We have the shadow. Go ahead and add all the way through the bottle. Go ahead and use a bit of an eraser here to make sure we can see. You might have to erase more than I did, and then go back in with your pencil for the parts you over erased. All right. And then I need to add the little trumpet thing. I'm going to call it a trumpet thing because I'm not sure what instrument that is. I don't play any brass instruments. And then the tenno, which I messed up the size, so I can go ahead and erase that. I'll start with the O, actually. That way I know how big to make it. There we go. Tenno. And there's some more numbers down here, but my pen is a little bit fat to do that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of scribbles. That way you can kind of see the color or the tone that's supposed to be. We got the little triangles as well. So we need to add those little triangles. Go ahead and add just a little bit here to indicate that there are reflections. And we can see this the second bottle seems a bit more accurate. It might be a little too thin this time, but it is a lot closer, and that's what matters. Is we're always trying to get a little bit closer to the original. In this stage. So if we go ahead and compare it, we can see how good of a job I did. And like I said, I made it a little bit too thin. But it's actually not that bad. The neck is a little too thin, and it's slightly too tall. But that's a lot closer. So that's step 2 done. So, I guess it's technically step 3. So let's write the steps. So step 1 is to make an illustration with a reference. And that reference could be a tutorial video, or it could be a photograph, or it could be an actual thing that's in front of you. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you actually want to draw it. That's the requirement here, is you actually have to want to draw it. Step 2 is to analyze, to use your peepers and look at the object and compare it to your original object and see how good of a job you did. And you have to be honest here. Did you do a good job, or did you do a bad job? And what you want to do is not tell yourself you did a bad job and then quit. What you want to do is you want to say, I did a bad job, but don't stop there. You have to figure out what it is specifically that you did wrong. And if you can't tell, find a guy who just likes you enough to do you a favor, but hates you also just enough to tell you the truth. And show them the drawing and have them tell you what's wrong with it. And ask them to be specific. Like when they say something looks off, ask them what specifically looks off. Is it too fat? Is it too thin? Is there something wrong with the lines? Is it too dark or light? Does he notice that I didn't put a highlight here? And it's like that just kind of ruins the whole fucking vibe to him. Like there are things that they'll tell you, and that's incredibly good. It's getting good feedback is a very beautiful thing. I did notice that I forgot to highlight on both of them, so we can go ahead and add that. There's also a highlight on the rim of this neck, so I can darken in the rest of the neck in order to make sure I get that highlight. See, I'm doing it now. Okay. I can also see that there's a label on the other side, it looks like, or maybe the whole label just wraps around, so I can also add that to mine. So there's a bit of a label on the other side here. Also, don't be afraid to fix the drawing you're currently on as you're analyzing. It'll give you a better reference for your next drawing if your previous drawing is just slightly improved. Because, for instance, if you start on your next drawing having analyzed that there's a label on the other side, you might forget it twice in a row, and then you've learned nothing. So if you feel like you could make the original drawing better, go ahead and do that. But it's important that we do eventually move on to step 3, which is to redraw it. With your newfound knowledge, taking in everything that you or your friend criticized you for, go ahead and use that and fix everything, every single thing that you said was wrong with the original one. Fix those. And if new problems pop up along the way, you'll just have to fix them as you go, but never back down on your original statements. If your friend says, "Oh, you forgot the highlights," don't you dare leave out those fucking highlights. I don't care if it like your composition no longer includes highlights because you fucked up somewhere else along the way. Figure out where the new highlights should go, right? It doesn't matter. And then you can do this all over again, and you can do this until you get a decent looking bottle. I'm going to stop on the second drawing because brevity, as well as the second bottle looks all right to me. So we're going to go ahead and stop here, but this isn't actually the end. There's still step 4, which is to analyze again, and we can analyze it and see what's wrong. So the first thing I noticed that's wrong is this label looks a little bit weird up here. It's not entirely clear that there is like a paper texture up here. It would be nice to add a little bit of a paper texture of some kind here. 2 is I'm kind of unclear of what's going on in this section specifically, where the hardened, or not hardened, where the differentially treated glass meets the rest of the bottle. In the reference, it's a little bit blurry here, and I kind of wish I could see what's going on better, so I might get a different bottle or one in real life to see what's going on here. And then the third thing I'm noticing is that this, and the glass itself, like the interior, doesn't like really satisfy me. I think I would rather have the entire thing be shaded. The problem is that I don't want to lose all of my intricate details trying to color everything in. But I'm noticing that I think it looks better when I do that. I'm also noticing that the shadow on the label goes deeper than the one on the bottle, which means that the bottle probably has more shading, it's just more subtle, and I had just completely missed that. So there is things that I could learn here. You can also still go back, like I said before, you can do this section as many times as you feel like until you feel like you understand the anatomy of the bottle. So step 5 is taking the anatomy of the bottle and destroying it while keeping all of the components. So we know there's a top of the bottle. That was weird. Okay, so we know there's a top of the bottle. We know there's a neck of the bottle. We know there's the base of the bottle. We also know that there's a label with a trumpet on it, right? Now, this is all of the consistent information, right? So what we can do is we can take these shapes using our knowledge of how shapes work, and we can play with them a little bit. So we know there's a circle on top. Well, one question is what would happen if that was a square? Another question is what happens if that top is really big. So if we have a square bottleneck, then we'd probably see a square stopper area up here with the label on it. The label would probably also be a square because it's on the square bottleneck. And then we get to the glass, and the glass would probably also be a square, although it doesn't have to be. And then we can have a square bottle. But we also want to keep all of the components. So we have a cork, and the cork is probably still round. Maybe it isn't, but it probably is. And then we have the label down here, and the label is still going to be on here, and it's still going to have that little trumpet. Let me do that again. There we go. It's still going to say whatever it said, 10-0. We're going to have like the little halo thing here. We're going to have those triangles. We're going to have the other half of the label on the back end. Except the back end is no longer right here because this is now the side of the bottle. If we look inside the bottle, because you can see through bottles, we can see that the bottom is square. So the other half of the label would actually be right here on the back of the bottle. And this side of the bottle would be pretty much bare. We could also have the label come on that side of the bottle, like this. I think that's more accurate to how the original bottle looked, because you could see it coming all the way over to this edge. And then we need to add the shadows. So remember, the top of the bottle is slightly different temperature. And if you remember, the shadow for this label goes about halfway through it, from our perspective. And then we know that the edge of this bottle, right here on the edge, is significantly darker than the rest of the shadow, because of our previous experience drawing this bottle. So we can go ahead and make the rim a bit darker. Color in this bottle with its back wall being the lightest part because that's where the light is. Go over it again. And we can repeat the original steps here if we wanted. So let's go ahead and look at this bottle and see what's wrong with it. I'm going to tilt it slightly because I drew it at a bit of an angle. Sadly, you can't do that in real life, but I'm using digital, so I can. What can we do for our analysis here? Well, we can't use the original bottle, or can we? We can look at the differences. For instance, we can say that the original bottle is still quite a bit taller than mine. So if we wanted to, we could decide that we wanted to retain that feature, and we could put a new bottom here and make this the new bottom of our bottle. And then we can go in with our eraser, make this the new label. And for our purposes, I'm going to probably need a smudge tool to smudge this part over. And re-add our triangles. And there we go. Now it's a little bit taller. There's a bit of a mess going on down there, but we could fix that with more rendering. Rendering is the process I showed in the Apple video. Rendering just means that you are continually working the image towards a final product. So rendering is just the act of adding more things to it. And once again, for the sake of brevity, we're not going to answer the question of what happens if this circle is really big yet. We're actually going to move on to the next object and repeat all of these stages for each of these objects. And this will just have to be a mystery, or maybe you can draw it on your own. What do you think this bottle would look like if it was very wide, a very wide bottle? But we can move on and see what it looks like when we do these steps to all of these other bottles. There we go. There's our bottle. A little bit smoother in the actual bottle, so we can go back and add that. This part is actually a little bit more square than I made it. I think this backside I did a pretty decent job on. Might be slightly rounded. Now, we could try again just to do those few changes I made. This is a bit square too. And I would implore you to, even if you do it right the first time, if this is something that you could see yourself drawing several times, especially if you want to learn how to draw like the anatomy of a person, or if you want to draw a recurring symbol or symbiology, or an artifact or item or something along those lines, if it's something that you think is going to be recurring and you're going to have to draw it a lot, you should definitely practice doing it correctly multiple times. But we're just going to go from step 2 to step 5 here. And we're going to do our iterative drawing here. So when I'm looking at this bottle, I can see that there are some interesting things going on here. I like this shape here. And I think we could probably turn that into just its own thing. So we can add the cork here, figure out how tall we want to make it. Go all the way down here. And then we just make it nice, smooth all the way down. Remember our circle practice. Nice and smooth all the way down. Add a little lip here because that's where the cork goes. And this side, I do want to keep it straight so that way we can have that little handlebar effect. We're going to make it a little bit wider because I like a nice fat jar. All right, and I'm going to make a mistake here on purpose just to show it to you. So another idea that you have to keep in mind is functionality. So whenever you're making an object that has to be used, for instance, if you're making a sword, and you have to use functionality for a few things, including the blade, but also the handle. So anything that's a tool or has a handle or needs to be held, like here's a hammer, right? You have to actually have room for the handle. It wouldn't make sense for you to make a big battle axe and have the handle be that big. It wouldn't make any sense because you'd probably grip the axe from up top at that point. There's no reason to try to grab that little handle. And the same thing applies to this vase here. How are you supposed to get your fingers into this little gap? You got to make sure there's enough room for you to actually get a human being's fingers. Assuming you're drawing humans, get a human being's fingers into that vase. So what we want to do is we want to realize that the reason that happened is because we put our little handle way too low on the vase. So if we put it much higher, then suddenly there's a lot more room for someone to actually grab this vase, pick it up, and go back to adding connection point. And we can even add a little bit of a counter curve. And so what a counter curve is, so what we can do is this straight line, and I've already done it a little bit, but I'm going to push it even further so you can see what I'm talking about. We can take this and we can really make it lean almost too much. So that way we can really accentuate the dynamics of this object. Then we can get that cast shadow from the handle. And you can see how much room I gave it for those fingers. Despite how distorted this object is, you could still imagine it in real life being used by a person. You could imagine their fingers going inside of that little gap. You could imagine this being filled to the brim with some fluid. Maybe it's a honey jar. Maybe it's for water. Maybe there's a fantastical drink, like the elixir of youth in this jar. Go ahead, get my blend tool back out. And so how do you know how to do this? That's a good question, right? So how do you know how to change objects to make them look more unique? Right? We already understand that we want to sort of take objects that we're familiar with and sort of adjust them to make them fit our style or maybe the atmosphere or just for fun to push objects into new directions, whichever way you want to look about it. Just to make them a little bit more interesting because like, you know, the original jar is pretty interesting, but this new one, I mean, it kind of looks like a bleach container, but it's still well, someone had to design the bleach container, right? There was a guy at some point who had to draw the bleach container before they made a 3D mold of it. I'm not sure who that guy was. I'm sure if you asked Bleach Company, they could tell you. Anyways, how do you know which ways to distort it, right? So like, say I thought it was a good idea to kind of make this into one big shape on this side and to do that counter lean and then have this big hump be this big square thing. Like, how did I know how to do that, right? To an extent, it was just kind of instinctual. Like, I just kind of, it just kind of felt good and natural to do those things. But if you wanted to, or if you're struggling with it, a good thing to remember is that these are objects that you're supposed to already like before you even start drawing them, right? The reason you're drawing them is because you thought they were interesting. I told you to assemble some interesting objects, right? So what you can do is you can look at the object and you can decide about it. What specifically is it that you're interested in? And so for me, it was this sort of, it's the fact that this is a very uneven vase, right? It has a lot of weight on this left side with this big hook, and then it's really smooth on the right side. So I wanted to make it extraordinarily smooth on one side and have this hook even curves up a little bit. You can see that it kind of curves up a little bit. I wanted to accentuate that.